Hi everyone, this is Sheila Butler with Successful Women Talk. I want to say thank you so much for joining me today. On today's episode, we have Kristen Fischer. Now, Kristen is a copywriter, journalist, and a certified professional resume writer. I was most excited to get to review her book, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. But before we jump right in, we're going to learn a little bit more about Kristen. I want to say hello.
Hi, Sheila. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Again, I love your book, and I can't wait to get started and jump right into the meat of that. But before we do, let's start with the general question that I normally ask, which is, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how that got you to where you are today.
Sure. I've lived in New Jersey all my life. I live at the beautiful Jersey Shore. And I graduated college with a degree in environmental studies. And I remember the April before, like a month before I graduated, I just had, I guess what every graduate has is this feeling of, oh my gosh. But mine was, I really don't want to do this. So I think that's normal, and I pretty much, had a hard time getting a job in the environmental field right off the bat. So I just took a job as a reporter at a newspaper because I was like, I can write, at least I can pay some bills. And although I did return, a year and a half later to work in the environmental field, primarily as a writer, a technical writer, that was my calling. I never really knew that you could put the writing skills into an actual career. Nobody says go to school to become a writer, I don't think. Or at the time it was, I don't know, taboo, or, it was get a real degree. And shortly after that, I, worked in news for a little bit. And then I began copywriting on a part-time basis and did that for 6 months to a year, and then broke off, full-time freelance. And I've been going for just about 8 years now. So
I love that. You brought up a really great point, which is that in schools, especially public schools, it's like we teach children that they're to go down one path, which is go to college, get a career, and start working for someone else. And we don't teach them that there are other options out there.
We don't, and it's not very skills-based when you're choosing a major, Like, I'm very interested in the environmental field, but when it comes down to the technical application of that, I have no desire to sit in the mud. That's what I always tell people.
Yeah,
so,
that's a great point. It's funny
it gets you to where you are, though. So
that's a great point. My cousin's child was, I think, 7th grade, and they were going through this course of, you have to kind of pick what you want to be when you grow up because that's going to pick your high school courses. And I'm like, well, the child was in the 7th grade. I mean, I didn't have a clue what I was going to do when I got out of college, much less what I was going to do once I was in the 7th grade. It's kind of interesting. Well, I love the path that you took, and I love that you're a writer. I'm always a little bit jealous of those that are good writers and copywriters. I am a good talker, and that's why I do a video show, but I am not the greatest writer. And so were you a writer early on from a kid, from your childhood?
It's funny. In putting together the book, I thought back, like, when did I know that I had this talent? Like, when did it appear, And there were 2 times in my life when it came out. In 4th grade, I was, nominated for this Young Authors Conference, and I talk about that in the book. Right. And also, when I was in college, there was a contest for Homecoming Queen. And, I was I still am a little bit of a tomboy. And I said, Homecoming Queen, how cliche. And then they said, it's an essay contest. And I was like, I can totally do that.
I loved that story. I thought that was the funniest thing.
I won the Homecoming Queen and, got to wear the crown and everything. And it was really cool because it was based on writing. And that's, looking back, you're like, this was always innate in me. I always loved to write. I just never thought to make a career of it.
I love that. Well, let's talk about your book, and we'll link this up. But the title of the book, of course, is When Talent Isn't Enough. And basically, the gist of it all is that you have to have business basics, even if you're a creative, to have a business that's probably going to be successful. You have to understand the business side of this. So such an applicable book, especially for freelancers like yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was the whole thing behind, what do I want my next book to be about? And, I do a podcast, freelance radio, about, creative professionals. And I really found a lot of them, kind of had that mindset, like, I'm talented. Like, if they don't like my work, then they don't have to be my client. And, that can get you so far. But when you need to pay bills on it and you really want to, everyone's talking about, living the dream, you have to be practical. And so that's why I wrote the book. It talks about all different aspects of running a legitimate business, but it kind of focuses on, it's not like, those books that are like, here's the formula,
Uh-huh.
and you've read the book. So it's kind of like, it incorporates stories from other creative people, but it doesn't give you a formula, but it kind of shoves you maybe in a direction where you can like capitalize on your own strengths and your own creativity.
How challenging is it to take someone that's for me, I'm really lucky. So I started in business with a business partner, and he was the creative, and I was the operations and logistics person. So I didn't have to be the creative behind the business. But I
Okay.
did find that with him, getting him sometimes focused on business was tough because he was the creative, and everything had to be beautiful, and it didn't matter what the customers thought because he was the creative, and we were creating beautiful, yada yada yada. But it's important. It is important to be able to see the business side of it, and to deal with customers is tough.
Yeah, it's tough, and honestly, I learned by trial and error myself, and I think there's a learning curve to it. You can't just read the book, even my book, and be like, all right, I'm ready to go in business. You've got to feel it out. But I think having something like this where it's all in one source, where you don't have to look at all those technical dry, here's how I'm going to learn accounting. That can be overwhelming when you start your business. You're creative. You want to jump in and be like, look, world, I just quit my job and I can paint. So it was really important to put something into, like, I think layman's terms. Like, it's not that hard if you're, constantly, as you go, things come up. Don't just ignore it. Oh, taxes, whatever, I'll just give it to the accountant. Like, research it, look into it, like, dig up your own answers, and, as you go, learn a little bit about how business works. It's not that bad. It makes you smarter, and it's better for your business overall.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a scary thing for people, like you said, but it's really not tough once you get into it. It's really kind of not that it's overly basic, but it doesn't have to be as challenging as what some people think.
It's definitely not. I mean, I had to write a chapter on accounting, and when I pitched this book, I was like, how am I ever going to do that? I was like, this is going to kill me, along with, legal stuff. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, and it was a little bit of homework, but, I actually taught myself in researching a little bit more. Now, I don't know everything. I'm not certified to give you tax advice, but, when you kind of just look into it and just take a deep breath and ask questions, have people, ask for things in layman's terms, like I would be like, I don't know what that means. People would explain something, or I'd read something and I would still say, I don't know what the heck they're talking about.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that you're honest about that, because you don't have to be the expert on everything, but you have to be
Mm-mm.
smart enough to go and look those things up when you need them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely, I mean, like, you don't have to know tax code, but you do not have to know to like file taxes. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
And one thing that I really loved about your book is that it is a technical book because it has all that stuff in there, but you brought it back for the creatives because you included a lot of stories in there and
Mm-hmm.
quotes and etc. from people that are creatives. So I think that helps a creative brain be able to go, okay, this is a business book, but if this person can do it, it helps me see that I can too.
Yeah, the stories I think are really what sets it apart, because I didn't want to write something like, here's how I think you should do it. You know what I mean? Like, I wanted to get people that you might know, if you're an illustrator, you may have heard of, Vaughn or Penny, who are in my book, and you might have heard of these people and be like, wow, I want to know their secrets, and they're really talking very candidly, and I can't thank them enough for that, for telling their horror stories and their, those stories. Or, there's a story about a guy in the book, Luke, and he's, doing a public speaking thing. I don't know if you read that. It's in the professional development, and he really talks candidly. Like, up on stage, he is put together, but he talks about how he got into it and an experience he had. And I think you need that, because you're like, okay, that person's like me. And then you see, I can do it, and I have my own gifts and my own strengths.
Exactly. I think the beauty of it is that you humanized it, because whether we like to admit it or not, we're all human, and sometimes it's helpful to see that other people, not that you want people to struggle, but it's nice to see that other people have walked in your shoes as well.
Yeah, or they're authentic, like, yeah, you don't want them to struggle, but it's nice to relate to people on that level. And because I think that in creative work, you know what? It is personal. In many ways, like, you do business, but my writing, like, overall is personal to me.
Right.
So it's really hard boundary, because you're putting out something that you generate in your opinion, and you're putting your, even in, when I'm writing ultra boring, website content or something like that, like, I'm putting, like, this is my attempt at it, client, I hope you love it. You're putting it out there.
Right. I totally
And
agree.
And yeah, sometimes you want to like throw something against a wall or pout or cry or scream when they don't like it. And that's what separates, the business from the personal. Can you take that personal criticism and respond professionally, I think.
Exactly. And sometimes it's you do have to bite your tongue. You sort of talked about that in the book. And the customer, not that every customer is the right customer to work with, but in a sense they are sort of right. You have to, or at least their opinion is their opinion.
Sure.
And you have to be able to handle those types of things. And for creatives, I find that sometimes it's challenging.
I think it's definitely hard because, you think, well, this is how it should be and this is my artistic interpretation. But I think when you're on their dime, you have to respect what they say, incorporate the feedback. You're not going to get, every project is not going to be like, oh my goodness, I so want to put this in my portfolio. I finish projects sometimes and I'm like, this one is not going on the website.
Thank God I'm done. It's usually one of those things.
So you kind of, you balance it out though. And I think a lot of creative people, some of them don't have that mindset where they're like, oh, I'm superior. Some of them don't have that way of thinking either. And they're just looking for tips on how to kind of deal with criticism and, how to work with, how does Kristen Fischer work with, Fortune 500 company when she's just Kristen Fischer,
That's a great point. And how do you do that? I mean, how did you put yourself out there and develop that clientele?
Well, to develop the clientele, I think you have to speak a little corporate speak. I'm a huge advocate, and maybe it's because I'm a resume writer. Something else I kind of got into as I went of, if you want these clients, you're going to have to, you're not just the talent. Put in a resume because all of the other contractors that they're hiring, you might be creative, but their HR department or their marketing director, they look at the same thing. They look at a resume or they want to see a professional letter or an introduction or have a professional meeting. They don't just want to do things however, you do things in your pajamas, which is completely cool. But I think you have to be a little professional. And, people say, oh, I'm indie, I'm not corporate, and that's great. But if you want to get those corporate clients, you have to appeal to them. You can still be creative and fun and, so distinctive. But I think you have to, send, use email marketing or, cold calling, approach them with business techniques. And I think when they see that you're reliable, you stick to deadlines, you're a professional. Like if something goes, wrong, you don't just, again, say, I'm the talent, that really helps you get into that, where I can work for corporations, yet I can work at home, and I'm so blessed.
Sorry, I agree. Sorry, I have a little bit of, we both have a little, I should have mentioned this at the beginning of this, when we started out our recording, but Kristen and I both have, she's getting over a cold, I'm getting over a cold, I have kids, so I'm sick all the time, so forgive me and excuse me for my random coughing, sorry about that.
And I sound like an operator.
Yeah, just for the record, and I should have mentioned that she normally doesn't sound this way. We've had some trouble connecting because of family issues that I've had going on, and we were not about to cancel our session today.
No.
Well, listen, I want to get into something that you talked about in your book that I found very interesting, which was hourly rate versus project fees. So I know sometimes people have a difficult time, especially when they're first starting out, which is, what am I worth? How do I price things? So let's talk about that subject just a bit.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess for creative professionals, you can go either way with an hourly rate or a project fee. And what I explain in the book is kind of how I do it. Like I kind of have an hourly rate that if a client wants, they want to hire me per hour, they can do that. But I find they're often very timid because people have told me I've had a copywriter come back and, they were writing like a press release and they're claiming it took 20 hours. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's why I really moved more of my model to project fees. But, certainly starting out, and it depends on the outlet. If you are, in the writing profession working in journalism, you're probably going to make less starting out just because I still get like writing assignments where the pay is like kind of crappy, it's different, copywriting, they tend to have more corporate marketing budgets. You can earn $100 an hour. In journalism, if I'm writing a blog for the web, I'm maybe earning $100 for the whole post.
Exactly.
So there's kind of that.
You know what I found interesting, Kristen, is when I first started out doing some consulting, is that I did like an hourly model sort of, but I did it also based. I said, okay, we'll kind of work on this hourly rate, but it was, excuse me. Then I decided, no, the client said, let's do it as a project, which ended up being much better. Had I been smart enough to put a contract in place, this was when I first started out, and I did not do that. And I know you talk about that in your book. It's great and great topic as well. But the project lasted, which should have been a short amount of time, for over a year.
Oh my
Now,
goodness.
it was on a website. And the problem with that is that I didn't realize that the client was very unorganized and the person building the website was very unorganized, and everybody was working on their own time frame, not mine.
Uh-huh.
So it was tough. So I know that's something that I think, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I think people need to be a little bit careful about that when they're going out on their own, is that have some clearly defined guidelines for what that project is going to be. Don't just go, okay, I'm going to help you develop this website in general, and here we go.
Yeah, and I get this from clients a lot. We want you to write some website copy, and I write a lot for the web. So I'm that's cool. I need an outline. I need to know which pages you want. I need to know approximately how many words. I'm going to give you this many amount of revisions. You're going to turn that, when I turn the first draft into you, I need to have that back in a week, or and then when I sum up and I bill to you, I need to have that payment in 30 days. This is why it goes into the legal stuff, and you don't want to go there when you're creative, but if you're running the business, you kind of have to, because you can get let me taken advantage of. That's a nice word for it.
Yes.
The Jersey girls always have to stop and think of a synonym for a word that we know we can't use on the air.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that is important. And I love that you talk a little bit about legal stuff in here. And I think there are a lot of things that people can do on their own. Yeah. You can do maybe your basic bookkeeping, and you can do your basic contracts. But I believe, from my opinion and my experience in my past businesses and in my current, is that it is good to have a legal person on your side. It is good to have someone to run things by if you need it. And it is really good to have an accountant or a good CPA, because there are things that you're not aware of even when it comes to basic accounting. So I think hiring those professional services is important, just as hiring a coach or consultant is important.
Yeah, and something I advocate for is to just kind of do it. Maybe you don't need an accountant every year, but maybe for that first year, don't just have them do your taxes. Talk to them. Ask, can I deduct this? Can I deduct this? Come to them with, a list of questions. Really use their expertise, because the accountant I worked with for the first 2 years of my business was phenomenal, and really set me up to know what I could and couldn't do. And now I just pass that off to my husband.
There you go. Exactly. But you learned, you educated yourself, and you learned the basics, which is so important.
Yeah, you have to kind of know, what can I, get away with, so to say. And you really have to have some sort of backbone for the business, because it sounds like, oh yeah, I want to, do this, mural or a series of, I don't know, jewelry makers. I want to make a line of jewelry for your boutique and everything. It sounds great. But if you don't have, something to track inventory and, payments and everything, it can get really ugly, and you can get stiffed. And that's the realty of it.
Yeah, it is true. And you can't just assume, I know a lot of, sometimes with creatives, they're not that they're naive at all, because I feel this way sometimes too. I always assume people are going to do the right thing, and maybe their intent is, but if you're not really clear on what those goals and outcomes are going to be, it makes it really tough when you get to the end.
Yeah, or like you said, it drags on, and then it's gone so long that it's just kind of out of control. So that whole idea of like a scope of work, when I write a website in my contract, it doesn't say website for hospital. It'll say the pages and how many lengths, how many revisions. You really have to, but once you get into it, I think it's kind of easy, because you create your own process and you know it, and then you can explain to the client, here's how I work.
Absolutely. You know what I find sometimes, excuse me, even with businesses, multi-million-dollar businesses, is that they're running and sometimes making money in spite of themselves, and they don't have systems in place. And in my opinion, that every great building has a firm foundation. Every strong building has a firm foundation. And the human body runs because of an intricate amount of systems. And businesses need systems. Even solopreneurs, in my opinion, systems are really important. Do you see that with creatives or some of the people that you work with, developing these types of systems is tough for them, or do you see that it's pretty easy transition?
I think at first, thought it sounds completely overwhelming, and it's like, I'm just gonna like run my business. I'm gonna do everything organically. You know what I mean? And I think as you go on, time will tell. You're going to go through, clients and the process. And really, it just got so tedious to, explain every detail. Now I have a page on my website, and I don't expect every client to read it, but most of them that find me are like, okay, here's how, she does this. And then they'll say, okay, now I read on your website that, we need to sign the contract. And that really has helped me so much, because I used to spend time on the phone trying to like convince people like, yes, we need to sign a contract. Right. Whereas now that kind of weeds out the people that are like all dodgy about contracts. Like the people that contact me know that they don't get anything without signing anything. And that may sound harsh, but it makes for better working relationships. I haven't had like people lapse on payments. Like in the beginning I had, people not pay up and stuff. And as a writer, some of the assignments were so puny that it's like, am I going to go to like small claims court over a couple $100 or, $100? No. So now it's, it really having those processes in place, it may seem daunting at first. And I say like, you don't have to use a system or a flow chart or a formula. Just kind of think like, how do I want this to work? Like, what is it? The person comes to me and then what do I do? What's the timeline involved? And kind of just, you can let that evolve organically,
Mm-hmm, exactly.
But have the process and kind of just work with it, play with it, do what works for you too.
So in your business, are you pretty systemized? And so what types of tools do you use to help you stay, and you do a lot of different projects. So what do you do to keep on track and systemize your business in general?
Okay, well, I'm pretty old school, which is why there's no webcam involved today, because because I don't have one. I'm going to get a new laptop soon with a new desktop with another webcam and everything. I'm pretty old school in that fact. I talk in the book about wanting to switch to QuickBooks. Okay, now my husband, he handles all of our tax stuff, and he's like, you need this. And, after writing the book, I was like, fine, I'm breaking down, I'm going to get it. I did the trial, and I was like, what is this, like profit and loss? Like, it was too old. Like, then I turned into like the creative person that was like, I don't need that, It was a little too much for me. So I do all of my accounting still in good old Microsoft Excel. It's just, when does the check come in? When is the invoices are numbered? When do they go out? I have kind of an infrastructure in my computer. I use a laptop and a desktop, which I think is so important, because if I don't feel like sitting at my desk where I am now, I can like go be on the couch. Or as I've been sick this week, I've still been able to work, thank goodness, because I can prop up in bed with my laptop and it's not so bad, So, I pretty much I use the two computers. I'm, again, old school. I have a fax machine, scanner, copier in my office, which apparently is, some people are like, you still fax?
Exactly. What are you
like,
doing?
I love to fax. Fax is new.
Listen. As a consultant for systems and processes, this is killing me. No.
So, I've thought about how I want business to work. I have technology-wise, computers. I use an old school. I tried to go digital with the planner. It was like an epic fail. But having a simple planner to write down every day what I need to do, I always get my deadlines done that way.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So you have to I tried to do the fancy, computer, on my smartphone and everything. It just did not happen. So I'm like, why am I forcing this?
Exactly.
Writing things works for me. I'm a nerd. I like to color code things. Let me tell you.
That is, what's great about it is that it proves that you have to do what works for you. And I think a lot of people see the new shiny tools as far as all the apps and everything. And yeah, they can be great if they work properly for you. They can't be more distracting. And it sounds like that some of those things to you are more distracting, and you're much more productive in the we'll say analog age that you're in. Actually, pen and paper and your Excel spreadsheets, it works for you.
It just you have to do that. So internally wise, like onboarding a client, I've got that pretty much, down, and, I know to make an invoice, and I still write down like who owes me what. I've been trying to do it more in the Excel to like when I work on something to say, so I don't forget, I wrote, this many articles for this client a month. So I remember to bill. And that's kind of, I think it's working.
It obviously is. I love that. I think the key takeaway is that you are keeping up with it. You are successful. You are running your business. It's just figuring out how to make that work for you, and it's working.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you this. How does someone that's going out on their own, how do they go and find clients? Because it's a little bit scary. I'm going to hang up my shingle. How do I find the right people?
I think it really goes back to a lot of it, as I, have progressed, goes back to the platform. Because when you're putting yourself out there, whether, you're calling up companies or, I like to do the kind of way where you kind of focus or target a couple companies. Oh, this would be a fun client to have, and you kind of approach them. I'm interested in, blah, blah, blah. Email works good for me because, of the writing thing. So that has worked very well for me. And having that strong platform that when that client, that prospect gets that email and they click KristenFischer.com, the site looks good. It's got clips. It shows, I've written for, A, B, C, and D. And that really does the selling.
So you have social proof there as well.
Yeah. I mean, like you can convince a client until you're blue in the face. I'm the best person for this. But when I got the jobs, if I meet with a client in person, I bring a tangible portfolio of, brochures and other things that I've written to show them, here's what I can do.
Exactly.
So, your outreach is important and you have to be obviously confident in yourself, to approach these clients, but you also need to just build up and how you do that is, maybe you take clients that don't pay as well in the beginning or, maybe you do a little bit of, pro bono but don't work for free. I mean, still reach out. I think the best way to get out there so you're not like, oh my goodness, like I have no money, I've got to take whatever I can get, is to kind of trim down work so you can maybe work part-time for a year and have some money on the side so you're not just out down to nothing. When freelance isn't coming in, at least you have some income to kind of ease the burden while you get on your feet.
Exactly. Then you're not pressured to take those clients that maybe you shouldn't. I believe it was Maria Ross from Red Slice was saying the other day in an interview that if you pick the wrong clients, if you pick the wrong clients, you can't find the right ones. So it's just being careful and selective about that. And in the beginning, you are going to have to take some that maybe aren't your ideal. But as you grow, narrow down and focus, picking the right ones will help you not pick the wrong ones.
Definitely. I mean, when I started writing, I had some, news experience and I had some environmental experience. So I targeted some of those clients and, that turned into, copywriting. And then you can kind of say, well, here are some of my clients. So maybe draw upon some of the skills that you have existing. If I go out and write for, a string in a newspaper or something like that, that can kind of expand your skill set. And then if you happen to be pitching a client and say, oh, well, if you're a writer pitching a client locally, I've written for, the newspaper. Well, they know that newspaper. So that kind of builds that credibility,
Exactly. And in your book, you have a chapter on talking about being the well-rounded freelancer. So let's just maybe, finish up with that saying, some people aren't meant to work from home. I like it, but I do find it really challenging. So what tips and tricks can you give somebody that's thinking about becoming a freelancer and being able to stay focused and productive when working at home as a freelancer?
I think, again, touching on what we've talked about before is, do your talent and, do your business, but also, think about going beyond that. Think about expanding. Think about not necessarily to be, an agency, but for me, it's taking the writing, into books, and now I'm doing work in magazines. And when a client calls me, I tell them I don't want to sound whatever, but I can probably write about anything because I know how to extract information about something, even if I don't understand it. So really kind of broadening your skills and, spending time to develop your skills, and also, working at home is not for everyone. And I struggled, I would say, for the first 3 to 4 years very much with oh, I want to work at night. And, I wasn't a morning person then, which I don't know how my life was. Excuse me. But now, I struggled with, well, everyone else is working 9 to 5. I need to be working 9 to 5. And, I'd be working at night, or it'd be like in the middle of the day. And I would, I want to go to the beach and I can work all night, and you really kind of have to work with yourself. Now I'm a morning person, so I pretty much do work. Now I'm like, everyone needs to work 9 to 5. But, you have to kind of give yourself those breaks. I go to the gym a couple times a week, obviously when I don't have a splitting, head cold. And I have to give myself permission. Like, let me go in the middle of the day. Like, it's okay. While everyone, let them sit at work in their cubicles. They can do that. I can go to the gym. And, this summer when I was, writing my book, I couldn't go to the beach as much. And I live like 5 minutes to the beach, which is, that's sacrilege here. But, I had to give it to myself. Okay, I'm writing this book right now. And on days that, it was a really nice day work. You kind of I need those breaks, even if it's to go do laundry. Like, I can't sit at the desk for even, I don't know, even like 4 hours straight. Like, I'm up, doing other stuff where, I'll take a break, or I've got music on, or you have to kind of go with what works for you. I have days when I'm like, I love being in my office, and I have days where I would rather sit on the patio with the computer, and I let myself do that. I'm still working. So that's great.
I love that. I think giving yourself permission and knowing your body, knowing when, stop fighting it. If you're not a morning person, stop trying to be a morning person,
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, listen, tell us something, just so people get to know you a little bit better. What would, if you had to say something out there that is different about you that nobody knows is kind of fascinating, what would that be about, Kristen?
Oh my goodness, what a good question. I really don't, what is different about me?
Yeah, like what is fascinating about you that most people that probably have worked with you would never guess? I just interviewed recently Anne Hanley from the Marketing Profs.
Okay.
She had multiple personalities. She really didn't have multiple personalities. She was talking about how when she was a kid, she had all these pen pals, and she did them as a different person. I thought it was hilarious.
Sheila, I think you've stumped me, because I'm very... You know what it is? I'm so, through my other podcasts, like, I believe in injecting your own personality. So a lot of people know that I am an avid football fan, and I adore the New England Patriots, like nobody's business.
I love it.
When I'm not, I will watch football and scream at the TV while I'm knitting. And that is a great Sunday to me.
That is fun. Scream
I'm very
while you're knitting.
I'm very passionate about that. I can be very social, and I have, I guess still a little bit of a college crazy streak, but, sometimes it's all business.
I love it.
So I guess that aspect, like my personality, because I work at home, maybe people don't get to see that. Like now when I go into an office, I'm like, everyone, let's talk at the water cooler. And they're like, we have to work. And I'm like, I miss the water cooler, because you just kind of miss that stuff when you're, solo. Like, I have 3 cats, then they're my coworkers, and, they haven't talked back yet.
I love that, and thanks for sharing that, because I think that's important. I think people sometimes, especially online, you meet these people online, and maybe you follow them and follow their work, but you don't get to interact as much, and you don't have that water cooler chat. So I think it's fun for people to see that you do have another side of you, knitting and watching the New England Patriots and screaming at the TV. Love it.
Yeah. Good.
Well, listen, if someone wanted to connect with you, where would you want to send them?
They can reach me through KristenFischer.com. It's I guess you'll have a link on your website. It's Kristen, Kristen, Fischer, Fischer, and it has links to the my books. A little bit about my business. I don't have a blog on that website because it's just so overwhelming to blog for clients, blog for books, blog for everybody. But you can connect with me on like Twitter. I'm pretty crazy on Twitter. I'm not one of those people. I do a little bit of like promotion and like business talk, but really it's about like random things like horrible shows on MTV and Bravo and just fun stuff, because I think people do need to get to know your personality. And when you do business all the time, even though it's a creative business, you're still working. So you kind of need to let a little bit of that shine through in a professional way.
I totally agree. And yes, we will link all these up, and I will link up a link to the book as well. Hey guys, you should grab a copy of this book. Again, the title is When Talent Isn't Enough, Business Basics for the Creatively Inclined. It is a great read, especially if you're new starting out, thinking that you're going to jump in. You are one of those gifted, creative, talented people. No one wants to be my Pictionary partner, so I'm not the creative type, but I love the book. I love the business aspect of it, and I think you will too. So check that out if you haven't done so. Kristen, thank you for being on the show and sharing all of your knowledge and experience.
Thank you so much, Sheila.
Have a great day. We appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Successful Women Talk. Listen, a lot of people ask me, Sheila, how did you build a business from 0 customers in revenue to thousands of customers and multi-7 figures within a few short years? Here's the secret sauce. We had great products, excellent customer service, and we leveraged, this is key, we leveraged our systems and processes. If you want to learn more about this or how to reclaim your time, join me over at www.successfulwomentalk.com, and I'll show you how to get the life, business, and customers you want. Thanks so much.